Good morning. My name is Doug Dortch, minister at Captiva Chapel by the Sea. Thank you for being with me today as we share together in another devotional. This morning, I would read for you a passage of scripture from the prophet Jeremiah, the first chapter, where the text says, "The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Alas, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am too young." But the Lord said to me, "Do not say that I am too young." You've heard the saying, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." Well, most of the time, we've heard that saying, and it's applied to hurtful things that others may have said to us, and many of us may have drawn strength from it by taking it to heart. But what about those hurtful things that we say to ourselves? What about those statements that we make to our own souls that chip away from our confidence and our self-esteem? Consider for just a moment the many ways that you may be limiting yourself by how you tell yourself that you're not good enough, or that you're not smart enough, or that you're not connected enough, or that you're not experienced enough. You see, all of these excuses and others like them hold us back from the possibilities of being able to accomplish truly significant things in our everyday life. What was it that Abraham Lincoln once said? "Argue for your limitations and they are yours." I think there's a lot of truth to that saying. I can't tell you how many people I've come across over the course of my life and my ministry who have opted out of some choice opportunities because of how they didn't think that they matched up. And especially has this been the case with opportunities that they've been presented with to be a part of something that has kingdom significance. In other words, to be a part of something that advances the purposes of God. Because when you look at the Bible, there have always been people who have struggled with the notion of being up to the task of doing what God has called them to do. And one of those persons was the prophet Jeremiah, who, when approached by God to tell the people of Jerusalem that God was about to use the Babylonians to set them straight, Jeremiah begged off of that mandate because, as he thought, he was too young. "Ah, sovereign Lord," he said, "I don't know how to speak, for I'm only a child." Now, most likely at the time God spoke to Jeremiah and Jeremiah offered that excuse, he was around 18 years of age, hardly a child, and yet his lack of experience no doubt led Jeremiah to ask for a pass in being prophet to the nations, lest he fall on his face and fail God and God's people at a time that was especially critical. Surely each of us can relate to Jeremiah's reluctance to accept God's proposal. It wasn't that Jeremiah didn't believe in God's ability to bring God's purposes to pass. Jeremiah was careful to acknowledge God as the sovereign Lord, as the Lord whose power is not matched by any other power. It was more that Jeremiah didn't see himself as the right person to make it work. Jeremiah didn't see himself as a person especially gifted for what God was calling him to do. And it's hard to argue with Jeremiah's logic. That's why we have laws on the book as to when a person is old enough to do things like get a driver's license, or land a job, or sign a contract, or join the military. You just can't have people taking on serious responsibilities without the training and or the experience that is necessary to handle it, unless you're talking about something that God calls a person to be about, and then all that matters is a person's willingness to accept God's assignment and to lean upon God's provisions. Part of learning to say yes to God is learning to say no to the things that do their best to squeeze us into the mold of the world. And so this morning, don't say yes to the pressures that are all around you to be perfect or to be prestigious. Say no to those things so that you can say yes to God's love for you in Jesus Christ, as the old hymn has it, just as you are. Don't say yes to giving up on a ministry initiative because it costs too much, or it targets the wrong people, or it doesn't promise any kind of numerical return for the investment. Say no to those excuses so that you can say yes to something that would never be possible if God were not in it. And so this morning I ask you the question, would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to pledge to God your mere faithfulness? And perhaps for you, a place to begin is by dropping the word only from your vocabulary, as in I'm only a child, or I'm only a teenager, I'm only a senior adult, I'm only one person, I'm only human. Because isn't that what Jesus did? We speak of Jesus as being fully God, and certainly Jesus was, but we also speak of Jesus as being fully human. So what does that mean, to speak of Jesus as fully human? In part, it means, as the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians, that Jesus was tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. In other words, in his hour of temptation, Jesus was always careful to say yes to God, even when Jesus knew that saying yes would lead him to the cross. Remember his prayer in Gethsemane's garden, "Not my will," Jesus prayed, "but thy will be done." And when Jesus said that, he may have been showing his humanity in the best sense of that word. Because when we say yes to God, as long as our yes to God is not a way of bargaining with God for more blessing, but or rather I should say, is because of our desire to be formed through our obedience into someone worthy for God to use in building and planning for the good future God is bringing about. So don't let your own words hurt you. Be a yes believer. For in a day when too much no, especially among Christians, uproots and tears down, destroys and overthrows a yes witness, when we say yes to God and to bringing about God's purposes to pass, so that regardless of our age or our experience, our background, or our status, everyone will have the chance to experience what I trust you have experienced, the marvelous and the matchless difference in this life that only a redeeming and restoring God can make. Thank you for being with me today. Now you say yes to God and be prepared for the possibilities that God opens to you. Have a great week, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week.